Guys, this is becoming more difficult. When I originally started doing this, I assumed it would be challenging since everyone would have criticism of me, my performance in these programs, my speech, and my general YouTube style. For example, I'm a beginner. I assumed that because of all the vitriol I was getting, I was going to cease doing it. I was unaware that this is not the JoeBudden podcast that we all fell in love with. Therefore, I would have to push myself to keep creating videos for it. People don't know that they are drawn to you in the first place because of your charisma, your ability to connect with others, and the way you discuss and are candid about many subjects. However, Joe has now formed all of these connections and isn't attempting to tread on anyone's toes. And I understand, I assure you, I understand that there are a few individuals on the pod with whom I communicate almost daily to the point where I don't want to talk about them in a particular way. However, things are becoming difficult. I'm no longer able to do it. I am unable to do so. Furthermore, I'm not attempting to be pessimistic all the time. However, gentlemen, when was the last time you consistently completed an episode? I'm not referring to once every 7 days. I am referring to those who are in the $25 and higher category. How many of the 4 episodes that air each week do you consistently finish? Now, it's 1.5, possibly 2 for me. After that, I either have to listen again or in segments. I can no longer simply listen to an entire pod. Furthermore, I have no idea what the hell actually transpired. I do, indeed. This turned into a company, and it has remained thus for all time. You can tell, however, when someone is feeling like the underdog and is working hard to achieve their goals. You could then tell when they believe they have attained that peak. Joe believes that he has arrived at the pinnacle. He doesn't believe he will ever lose his fan base as a direct result of that. Because people weren't impressed with her most recent release and are tired of her business tactics, which include releasing 20 different versions of an album in an attempt to sell the 3 to 4 million copies she sold in her first week, Taylor Swift is set to see a change in her base to a much higher scale. People will cease commenting once they realize the games are happening. They will no longer pay attention. Those who never change include legendary performers like Dolly Parton, who is still performing. So much so that when her sister announced she was unwell and in need of prayers, everyone on the planet prayed for her to die, to the extent that Dolly had to come out and tell us, "Hey, I'm still working. She has been reliable for 50 or 60 years, so I just wanted a break." However, it's challenging to maintain consistency in this field, particularly when you lack the camaraderie, cohesiveness, and dynamic that you once shared with your original group. Particularly if you aren't real buddies in real life. Particularly when none of you have any stories. In the case of Rory, Mal, and Joe, at least they had anecdotes from years ago that would be relevant to any subject they were discussing today, so there's always a connection. However, they have nothing to talk about now that we know they are not buddies, that they don't hang out together, and that they don't do anything outside of the pod. Essentially, it has been transformed into a visual Twitter stream. They are simply repeating what we see on Twitter and adding their own opinions, which is what all these shows essentially do, but it's what sets Joe apart from the others. Because you worked in the field and were an underdog throughout the duration of your profession, you had your own unique experiences. Therefore, it makes it simpler for us to want to support and follow you until you look blank, and know that we'll be there for you until you never have to rap again. But because I made it, Joe now believes he will never have to rap or do anything else again as a direct result of that. Now, this is simply the norm. Nevertheless, people will start creating their own podcasts after reading the original JoeBudden content. What occurs since there are a lot of podcasts available at the moment? What occurs if you lose half of your fan following due to the current podding style? Attempting to get back to the previous state will be too late. However, I am unable to tell Joe this because the last years of my life have been the most prosperous for me. When I eventually came up with an IP that I could control, I was 36 or 37 years old. This IP, however, is not the IP of the past. Sasha is a stunning woman, but what does she contribute to the performance? What is she bringing? Mona is on her way, and she will finally reach her destination on the show. However, as she owns her own business, they won't initially click either. Additionally, since Joe is now Joe in the room, everyone will kiss his ass since they know what he makes and can do. I won't say that they are jealous. They will use every effort to maintain Joe's good graces. You all got to laugh at all of my jokes with Rory and Mal, and they would laugh at his joke if it was hilarious, even if it meant a horrible pod and a bunch of yes men, and we wouldn't be talking about this subject. However, they were hurling insults at Joe, such as F you. When you completed X, Y, and Z, you couldn't say that. Consequently, I am uncertain whether we will ever return to the JVP or the pod of old. And I must admit that this isn't it. And based only on the relationships you guys have up there, I'm not sure if it will ever be that again. However, if you think about it from Joe's point of view, he's essentially Stephen A. Smith to ESPN to his own network. Joe needs to understand that it's not just his co-host and that he has a big part in why the pod is the way it is now. Nothing will ever change. However, we were able to examine it from this angle, and for that reason, I am certain that it will never alter. Joe wasn't getting compensated for the best version of the pod at the time it was released. During one of his outbursts, he uttered something that would always be remembered by me. It will remain in my memory. I was receiving more bags than anyone else. I was receiving bread from Revolt. I was still receiving bread from Complex, Spotify, all of the promotions and sponsorships. But I have my podcast in the interim, and I don't get paid for it. The pod was at its peak during that time. It's also a little diluted now that it's beginning to get watered down. No one will perceive it in the same way as before, but it's giving me the most money I've ever received. What would make me revert then? And regrettably, that makes it harder for me to complete pods because it sounds more like a production than just friends squabbling with one another. As I was listening to the podcast this morning, I noticed that I was stopping it to visit YouTube. You could tell that Doug, DeMiro, Keenan, Nick, and Filippo are true buddies, so I listened to his entire podcast on vehicles. They simply go back and forth while hurling jabs at one another. The cohesiveness of the path is evident. You can tell that they are true friends even if you disagree with everything they say. I click back to Joe's, though, and you can see that it's a production. People were obviously walking on eggshells. People were clearly holding back and not expressing what they truly wanted to say. And the reason I bring up Dougie DeMiro is that Joe has connections with all of the people in the business. And since I'm beginning to do the same thing, I need to pay attention to what I'm saying to myself. However, Joe doesn't want to tread on anyone's toes because he has ties in the sector. He will therefore stay mum on the matter. Doug makes far more money in a totally different industry. Thus, they will get it to the point where you won't embargo if he talks about Ferrari, Porsche, or to a much lesser level Kia or Hyundai. You simply cannot have our car. You must purchase our vehicle. You won't receive any test cars from us. And he earns his money in this way. Yes, that was until he came up with Cars and Biz, but that's another story. Joe isn't even attempting to accomplish that. What comes next after podcasting? I'm being honest with you because of the event, Joe. People will eventually start to turn against you because you have already peaked. You may or may not be aware of it. You do, I'm sure, but you're losing ground. Now you're going downhill. Doug saw that he was losing ground, so he made Cars and Bids so that I could produce a video about any car he put up there that I'm trying to sell. Joe, what's your moment like that? What will be your next move after podcasting? I've been making references to this for years. Joe sees the metrics far more than we do, and he doesn't want a pod for the long run. He is more aware of his pod's dissension than we are. What comes next, though? Because in Joe's opinion, it is to make shows. But nobody's going to sign up now that the $20 million Patreon amount has been disclosed. And they will demand a larger cut if they do. Therefore, unless you can obtain multiple shows under your network, it won't be the retirement plan you originally set up. But gentlemen, I'm not sure. I don't wish to voice my complaints. I'm just making it clear that this isn't it, and there must be a significant shift. And hiring mics alone won't get you there. It simply isn't. Those like Ish exist because you need to draw on your reserves and make real friends and those who will be angry with you. But now Ish is beginning to display his shortcomings. He barks at Joe in the same way that he does at everyone else, although he doesn't connect with them all as well. But I'm not sure. I'm just complaining right now. Please share your thoughts with me in the comment section. Since you've undoubtedly been doing that lately, please let me know if I'm bothering you or not. I'm crazy, but there's a rationale behind that. I therefore kind of wanted to speak about it in a video. But as I mentioned, if you enjoyed the video, please like it. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the page. If so, you already know how amazing we are. Indeed, a video about Patreon will be posted today. I'm sorry, but I don't want to keep making up videos for Joe when people pay to hear me talk and post information about me, so I guess I'm going to take the Patreon in a different direction. I'm currently at my brother's house. We're going to cut it up, most likely spend an hour on Patreon. I'll see you all a little later today, so go check that out. Calm.